we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, this is part of our virtual IFAS series for 2024. The team was on the road in January, 3 different locations across the state of Illinois: Mount Vernon, Peoria, and DeKalb. And then we've since all been rotating through here in the webinar studio on Thursdays, kind of making those presentations. Typically a few updates since the in-person version, so a little bit different, but in general, the same material. And today we have rotated through now, and we are now to Jonathan's topic, farm policy, the current state and the look ahead. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan and let him get started.
Well, Nick, you can't avoid some of your some of the credit for this topic and the discussion we're going to go through.
Blame
or blame, if you want to take the blame for the slow path for a farm bill. So let's do a real quick kind of overview of a few things. I think probably the most important bottom line for any of the producers who are listening to this is the one hopefully you already know, which is while the farm bill was scheduled to be reauthorized last year, it was not. So the 2018 Farm Bill was continued for the 2024 crop year and program operation. So the upside of that is not a whole lot changed, or actually nothing has changed for you for 24. And we'll get through some of those aspects. If we go back over the last 5 years, the 2018 Farm Bill, as we've noted before, pretty unusual experience for farm policy and for farmers, because in addition to crop insurance, Title I support payments, and conservation assistance, we saw record levels of additional or ad hoc or supplemental assistance, CFAP is the coronavirus response packages and payments, as well as the market facilitation program in 2018 and 2019. So this kind of sets us up for a rather unique or unusual sort of experience under the last Farm Bill, which may challenge how we view things going forward. If we look back over the baseline that the Congressional Budget Office produced back in May of last year, and note they provided an update last week, and I'll have a farmdoc article out today that'll look into some of those items on the update. But I'm still using the last one in part because we have not gotten any definitive word that they would change and use the February 24 numbers yet. But looking at the spending over the baseline, the 10 years, and anybody's been through these conversations before knows that this is a key factor in Farm Bill reauthorization debates, because congressional budget rules require that the Congressional Budget Office take a 10-year look ahead on what they think spending will be under the major mandatory program areas. So this is a snapshot of that. Still, the bulk of the farm spending going out through crop insurance. Then we have the Title I commodities, conservation, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which added, at least in CBO's estimation, another 15 to 16 billion in spending for conservation assistance to farmers. As we said, it's continued for 24. So this decision is familiar, hopefully, to everybody. You're going to enroll your base acres in either the Agricultural Risk Coverage or ARC program or the Price Loss Coverage program, PLC. That decision should be done by March 15th for the 2024 crop year. And if there are any payments triggered out of that, you would see those around early October of 2025. For the congressional watchers on this webinar, March 15th may strike you as notable because the current continuing resolution for funding runs out March 1st and March 8th. So I do not know if Congress does not get a funding resolution taken care of by that time. I don't know how this date's going to play out if we have an unfortunate shutdown situation. So stay tuned for that, or get into the FSA office as soon as possible and make this decision and not wait for whatever problems may arrive early March. Again, as everybody should be familiar by now, ARC has 2 versions or 2 options within it: the county level average yield option, which is a crop by crop decision, or the ARC individual whole farm yield option, which is all your base acres for all the program crops on the farm have to be enrolled. The Price Loss Coverage program is also a crop by crop decision, so you could mix and match PLC with ARC County on your farm with different base acres. You can put your wheat base in PLC and your soybean base in ARC County, for example. And the other issue with PLC is that you have the option to purchase a supplemental coverage insurance top off, the area-wide top-up that you would have above your underlying insurance. That's only available if you enroll in PLC. Price loss coverage, again, fairly straightforward, fixed price program. This is now 50 years running with a little, the 1996 Farm Bill was the only time we haven't had that in the last 50 years. This is that fixed price level, $370 for corn, $840 for soybeans, and $550 for wheat. That's written into the statute. And if that market year average price is lower than that, then we're going to trigger a deficiency payment on that difference. The key, and this is something we're going to get into a little bit more, the key for decision-making in 2024 and possibly in future years if this policy continues, is that 2018 added this effective reference price calculation, which uses that same 5-year Olympic moving average where you drop the high year and the low year, that we use that in the ARC program as well. This allows the reference price to move up if 85% of that 5-year Olympic moving average has increased, and you can top out at 115% of the statutory reference price. So this is actually looking to be relevant, or it's going to be relevant right now for the 2024 crop year or program year decision. Based on the last couple years of high market year average prices, the corn reference price is moving up from $370 to $401 for 2024. And by next year, if this policy continues, it will move up to the maximum of $426. So this is an important factor for the farmer in their decision making between ARC and PLC. You want to factor in how that 401 might look. Soybeans have a similar situation. They're moving up to 926 in 2024 and on its way to its maximum of 966 next year. And so, again, these high prices we've seen in the last few years are impacting the PLC program and impacting those reference prices. We'll come back to that in a few minutes because this also has relevancy for the Farm Bill debate that has yet to begin in Congress. But first, we want to do a little bit more refresher. Nick, you want to take over on ARC?
Yeah, so the ag risk coverage or the ARC program, I guess, is the other set of options that producers have beyond PLC. Again, these are the same decisions this year that we've made now, going back to 2019 when the 2018 Farm Bill got implemented. It's the same options. ARC is the revenue program option. So it's a revenue-based program originally introduced in the 2014 Farm Bill, some tweaks to it made in 2018. And there are multiple options within this ARC program. There's a county level version that's based on county level yields. And then there's a farm level version that's based on farm level yields and also introduces some additional complications in terms of combining crops and things of that nature. The revenue guarantee for ARC is 86% of a benchmark revenue measure. And that benchmark revenue comes from taking a benchmark price, multiplying that by a benchmark yield at the county or the farm level, depending on the version of the program you're looking at. And again, as Jonathan said, those are based on Olympic averages over the course of 5 marketing years for prices, national marketing year average prices. And then on the yield side, it's again a 5-year Olympic average of that same 5-year period for county crop yields for ARC County, farm crop yields for ARC Individual or ARC IC. Mentioned the tweaks that were made to ARC in 2018. We added trend adjustment to those yields that are used in that Olympic average to get the benchmark yield. And there is now also a lag in that 5-year period. So for example, for the 2024 year, the relevant marketing and crop years for prices and yields are 2018 to 2022. The lag is 2023, and that is so we know what all 5 of those prices are that go into that benchmark price calculation because we're still in that 2023 marketing year. So that's the main reason for that 1-year lag adjustment there. So we've written kind of a number of articles that have rolled out the last 3 or 4 Tuesdays on FarmDoc Daily. Wanted to highlight a few things there. We'll also mention this at the end of the webinar this morning, but we are planning on doing a 2-part risk management webinar series here starting on Monday of next week. And so we will get a little bit more into detail on the ARC PLC decision as well as crop insurance and some other risk management things to think about. But did want to highlight this at least today. And so what we're looking at on the screen here is from an article a few weeks ago, and it compares that effective reference price that Jonathan mentioned, which has moved up above the statutory minimums for corn and soybeans. They're up there in the third and fourth rows of the table. In that green section, you can see the 401 for corn, the 926 for soybeans. Again, that's the price level at which those PLC payments would get triggered. Those high prices we've experienced during that 5-year period that has led to those increases in the effective reference price have also increased the benchmark price that goes into those ARC guarantees as well. And so that ARC benchmark for corn is $4.85, and the ARC benchmark for soybeans is $11.12. And then in the second to last column there, we've got what we define as the ARC trigger price. That's the price where ARC would start to trigger support if your yields were at their benchmark levels. So again, ARC is more complicated than this. It's hard to talk about the price protection side of it and the yield protection side of it completely in isolation because they work together. But again, if we had yields come in right at benchmark levels in 2024, ARC would trigger payments on corn base at anything 417 or below, and anything at 956 or below for soybeans. Both of those are higher than that effective reference price. So it's, again, a price-focused way to think about comparing ARC and PLC for the 2024 year. Again, continuing to focus on sort of that price protection side when making the comparison between ARC County and PLC for the 2024 year. This comes from another article in the last couple of weeks that we put together. Again, those ARC triggers where payments would start to be made for yields at benchmark level. That's the values there shaded in gray. That's the 417 for corn, 956 for soybeans. The prices next to those, which we call the ARC max trigger, that's where the maximum payment for ARC would be reached if we were at those benchmark yield levels. So once prices got below 369, ARC County support would kind of shut off at that point if we're at benchmark yields because we'd be hitting that 10% cap. And then I guess the salmon colored values there, and then the two shades of green, those look at different scenarios with sort of different yield levels. So, 95% of benchmark, those values are if we had yields below benchmark. You can see that ARC trigger price moves up and the ARC max trigger moves up. And then the kind of the last 4 columns there that look at, good yields relative to benchmark, 5% or 10% above benchmark. We'd have ARC trigger payments at lower prices in those cases because we're going to have a revenue bump from higher yields. And then that ARC max trigger obviously adjusts as well. That's, again, where we would hit the 10% cap. So again, a lot of values to look at, a lot of values to think about, but again, just trying to illustrate that, kind of comparing price protection, but also factoring in that yields also matter for that revenue based ARC program. All right, so kind of keeping on that line of thinking, yet another article we put out in the last few weeks, one that was tried to focus more on that yield side of the ARC program and in making the comparison and helping with the decision. So what this curve shows is the different yield combinations on the vertical axis and the price combinations on the horizontal axis that would result in ARC County payments being triggered. All right, so and those percentages are all measured relative to those benchmark yields or benchmark prices. And so maybe the 2 points that we focus on here, the one in orange for corn, if we think about the 450 marketing year average price, if USDA is correct, and that's what we see as a national marketing year average for 2024, something in that mid $4 range, that would imply that some yield losses would need to be realized at that price level for ARC County to trigger payments. For soybeans, if we use an 1130 marketing year average price and we just hold that fixed and we assume that's the price that we see in 2024, we'd have to see some soybean yield losses as well, and even larger soybean losses at that point to trigger ARC County payments. So again, Holding yields fixed, we can think about price trigger levels. Holding prices fixed, we can think about yield trigger levels, and that's kind of what we're doing here in this graph. All right, so how likely is it that we might see some big enough yield deviations from benchmarks to trigger payments based on that yield side of the ARC program? This slide and the next one kind of give a sense for that. So this is just an example for Champaign County. We kind of constructed what the ARC benchmark yield would have been going back to the mid 90s had that program existed. It's kind of our estimate of where that benchmark yield probably would have been. That's the kind of the black line that you see there. And then the orange line is the actual county yields that were reported by FSA for more current data and NAS for older data. And you can see that there's some years were above that benchmark yield, some years were below that benchmark yield. And you can see just how often in the last, going back to the mid 90s here, how many years we would have had yield losses that may have been sufficient to trigger ARC County payments because of that yield deficiency. So Champaign is kind of our high productivity, low risk within the state of Illinois example. So you can see the variability there. And you can see how that changes when we think of one of our higher risk, lower productivity counties in Southern Illinois. This just happens to be Franklin County. You can see a lot more yield variability, even with that county average, and a lot more potential to trigger yield losses sufficient to maybe get ARC County payments in a county like Franklin, where you just do have that larger yield variability. Again, the price component is the same regardless of where you're at. And so that yield variability is really going to be area specific depending on the county that you're in. Jonathan?
Yeah, well, before we get into the cloudy and less optimistic part of this, I think, Nick, that information, it always strikes me as just to how much goes into this decision. And ultimately, it looks like overall, if as you know, we always advise everybody to run the numbers for their farm and get a sense of their farm and county. We've got the Excel decision maker what if tool is available on the farmdoc website, and we are in the process of still updating the ARC PLC web-based calculator, and hope to have that done soon so you can run those numbers specifically on your farm. But in general, you've not seen anything in this, as you run through all this information, in general, you don't see anything that kind of cuts against the sort of, rule of thumb here, which would be soybean base acres, ARC County looks like the best option. Corn, also ARC County. But it really depends on how low you think prices are going to go. That market year average price for corn could, if it goes low enough, could push into PLC, but it's hard at this point to see a market year average scenario that would really alter that kind of baseline assumption of which programs are more effective for corn and soybean base.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the farm program decision in isolation and just comparing ARC County to PLC, for example, and we still, again, advise farmers to run their own numbers and even consider ARC IC, because there are cases where that program makes sense. But if we're just thinking about the PLC versus ARC County comparison, I think what we're seeing now is, if you're picking based on the likelihood of payments being triggered, the likelihood of payments from one program being bigger, if additional stress occurs, ARC County would be probably the choice for corn and soybean base. PLC would probably continue to be the choice for wheat. But there are things that complicate that, as you said, individual farm situations. Kind of what keeps you up at night, where you think what's your greatest potential headache. If it's severely low prices, there is a case for PLC. In terms of maybe lower likelihood but severely low price scenarios. And then the other consideration is on the crop insurance side, as you pointed out. We'll talk a little bit in more detail about this again in the risk management webinar on Monday. But if you're interested in using that supplemental plan SCO, that kind of makes the commodity program decision for you, because you have to have those acres enrolled in PLC.
Yeah, great. So our best view of this for now. And so this takes us to the 2024 Farm Bill discussion. And if you need to sort of grasp the cloudiness and rocky path in front of us, right, this should have been done a year ago. It is now middle of February 2024, and we've seen absolutely no progress on a Farm Bill reauthorization at either the House or Senate Agricultural Committee level. So we've not even begun the process at this point. And as I mentioned, part of our challenges, and we'll get into this a little bit, but a big part of our challenges have been the sort of dysfunction around funding the federal government. So we're in these continuing resolution scenarios that really complicate getting anything done and take up a lot of legislative time. But we'll try to give an overview here, not a prediction or prognostication, just our best read of kind of the situation as it stands right now. So as I mentioned, we've not seen any progress at even getting started. And really, we've got three major problems that are standing in the way of getting a Farm Bill done. And the first one is around reference prices. So we noted this back in talking about PLC. What has been reported for quite some time now, at least in news stories and comments, but what I think is most important and telling about this is we've yet to see actually any proposal for an increase in reference prices. We've just seen reports that there's a demand by some interest to increase reference prices, but we don't know which crops, what levels, what that costs. So that leads to the next bullet point. As rough as we can tell based on just guesswork about what a reference price increase might look like, we could be talking about a CBO estimated cost of $20 to $50 billion because the Congressional Budget Office has to project the spending estimates over 10 years. So it's a huge potential cost. It requires not only the 10-year, peek into the unknown future as to what prices will be and sort of how that would play out, but the budget rules also require offsets. So problem number one is this is a huge request with no details, and we don't know what it would cost or how it would be offset. Some of the reporting out of the House, and yesterday Secretary Vilsack was before the House Agriculture Committee, and it just came up a few times, where there's a focus on the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. That's that direct assistance to low-income individuals and households to buy food, and some look at conservation spending. So this is a big driver of the sort of failure to launch a Farm Bill reauthorization process. Complicating this further are the charts that we already went through, which is corn and soybeans in particular. We're going to see that effective reference price moving up. So how that impacts this decision and what kind of priority it is to move up reference prices when the effective calculation is going to move them up anyway, at least for a good portion of the crops and base acres, complicates this. If we jump ahead, the second problem, of course, then comes down to that offset issue. And so one of the things that has been talked about is the conservation investments that were added into or included in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. This was a large piece of legislation that funded a whole host of things around climate change adaptation or climate change efforts, energy, and so forth. But tucked in there was about $18 billion in additional funding for four of the major conservation programs: the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP, and then the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, RCPP. All four of these programs are authorized in the Farm Bill and funded through the Commodity Credit Corporation, or the CCC. And so what you see on this chart in figure 1 here is the sort of baseline. Again, this is from May of 23, so this has been updated, but hasn't changed too significantly, at least upon an initial first look. You've got the baseline spending. These are the CCC dollars that are authorized by a Farm Bill and go out as mandatory spending in the baseline. And then the Inflation Reduction Act added funding on top of that. So what you see above that black line then is the projected spending or spend out rate of those Inflation Reduction Act funds that are available through 2031. So USDA has until 2031 to spend them all. And you can just see they're just adding up to additional investments in conservation for farmers over that time frame on top of what's already there in the Farm Bill. What makes this complicated is if you see that additional funding as something that can be eliminated or taken out and used as an offset. And so we'll get into a few more aspects of that detail, or a few more details of that sort of offset discussion. But it is clearly a political challenge that we're seeing to moving a farm bill or getting a farm bill started if, the demand for increasing reference prices requires taking money from these other priorities like conservation. The map here is available on the policy design website as an issue brief. This was a first attempt to project out using historic spending allocations where those additional funds in the IRA would be spent. And so Illinois, for example, at a very early rough prediction, could get over $496 million in additional conservation investments going to farmers in Illinois. And so clearly taking that money away does have an impact on the ground. So that leads us to the next part of this. So these two problems, the push to increase reference prices and the requirement that we offset reference prices increases by doing something like taking conservation dollars, is compounded when we get into the murky mess of how the CBO scoring process is. And this is just for the record, this is not a critique of CBO. This is just a reality of how this process works. So the chart in front of you, I know, is a little bit messy, and Jim and the economists, love to make fun of my chart making abilities, and I accept that. That's a valid criticism. But let me try to walk you through the story in this chart a little bit. So I took the most recent February projections from CBO, and the lines at the top are it's sort of a measure of the market year average price as a percentage of the effective reference price. So that's how the payments would be triggered if CBO's price projections were accurate. The sort of pink area represents 100%. So anything below into that pink area, we would expect a payment under PLC because the reference price is higher than the market year average price, or in this case, the market year average price is below the reference price. So peanuts is the clear outlier here with every year in the payment zone, if you will. But what I think is more important about this is, so we see the CBO projections and prices. Below that, these stacked bars are what CBO projects will be spent in terms of outlays for PLC for each crop. And as you get through this and start looking at market year 2028, which would be paid out in fiscal year 2030. So I've aligned market year and fiscal year to try to get these in some sort of common time frame. What you see particularly in corn, beginning with the market year 2028 and fiscal year 2030, is that the price projections are above the reference price. So they're above the 100% threshold, but CBO continues to show and project spending on corn and PLC, even though farmers would not receive a payment on corn base acres in that year. So what I'm trying to get to is the complications around scoring and the way the economic modeling gets the projections out there. This complicates the use of this as an offset. And to try to simplify it, Jim helped me out here and cleaned this up a little bit and just focused on corn and soybeans. So again, you see the payment threshold for corn and soybeans, and then fiscal year 30 through 34, which are part of the 10-year baseline that Farm Bill has to deal with, projects spending where there would be no actual payments if those were the actual market average prices in those years. So the challenge we're seeing is not only do you have to offset the projected costs, but you're offsetting projected costs that would not result in payments under those price scenarios. So the loss of funding here could be substantial in that you could use all of the IRA funding to try to offset increasing reference prices because CBO would project payments and farmers would never see those payments because prices are even in the projections are above where the trigger point would be. And so this really complicates not only the operation of this, not only the negotiations and the drafting of the legislation, but it complicates the politics drastically because you're taking from one priority, which would actually pay out to farmers for conservation, and you're using those funds not to pay farmers, but to cover whatever projections are 10 years down the road in CBO's modeling efforts. And again, this is not a critique of CBO. This is just the tough reality we have with the way the budget rules play out. And so it isn't a simple one-for-one trade-off in this discussion. Nick, I think, has some point on that.
Well, yeah, and I mean, again, not a criticism of CBO in any way. It's just I think for like the casual viewer or reader here, it's hard to understand if we've got projections for market year average prices above those trigger points or that payment threshold as it's labeled here. why are we still projecting spending on those programs? It's the same reason why if you go to the board and want to buy an out of the money option, you're still going to pay a premium for it, because this is the future. We don't know. Those projections are, this is what we think the price is going to be on average, but we know there's a chance that things will occur that cause that price to go lower and maybe dip below that payment threshold in reality. And so that's reflected there in the estimates of those future spending levels, the potential for that price to be realized below that projection.
Yeah, and I think, as I understand it, right, this is part of the modeling effort. So CBO, because we are projecting prices, or because they are required to project prices 10 years into an unknowable future, they got to build in a lot of that sort of risk. So you're running thousands of scenarios of different prices and averaging the outcomes. And so I think fiscal 2030 is a really interesting one to look at, because what we see is in the years in which there were prices projected below the threshold, you're a couple $2 billion in corn PLC payments, but that carries over, right? Even when the projected market year price jumps above the threshold, we're still seeing a fairly significant, above almost 2 billion, I guess above 1.5 billion in payments. And so some of that uncertainty is what we're seeing. And so you're paying for, if you use the conservation dollars as an offset, you're paying for that uncertainty in the model and in the score, but you are not necessarily going to get a payment out of that change that is scored. And so again, this just is an attempt to try to, I don't know if I can say it's making anything clearer, but it's trying to make sense out of, or sort out, what is a very difficult negotiating matter around this issue for reference prices and offsets. That I think is clearly the single biggest blocker to getting sort of the first step of the process going. And that's at the committee level, where we would see legislation drafted and produced and marked up by the committee. And we haven't even seen that yet. And I think this is a large part of it. The rest of this is even less optimistic. It is just simply the third part of the problem here. And this is really for the House and Senate floor. The Congress, the 118th Congress, has so far been a very unproductive Congress with a whole host of challenges in getting any major legislation through. And so this really centers on the House of Representatives, which came in with a very narrow majority. And as of a special election Tuesday night, that majority is down to 219. You need 218 votes to pass anything if everybody's there. And so it is an extraordinarily tight majority. In fact, not trying to be controversial or anything, but I'd argue you don't have a functioning majority at this point, because you have factions within the majority caucus who are in strong disagreement over many, many things. If we need examples, they've removed one speaker. We have a new it took a month or so to deal with that. We've had debt ceiling threats and negotiations, and we're in continuing resolution challenges. So we're seeing the results of this narrow majority in the sense that it's not functional to move legislation. So that sort of leads to a pretty straightforward conclusion that if the House Agriculture Committee produces a partisan bill, it's unlikely to make any progress on the House floor. In fact, it's incredibly vulnerable to attack from all sides if they go partisan. And even if the House could pass it, it would not stand a chance in the Senate, wouldn't be signed into law. That takes us back to these funding offset challenges. If the House Ag Committee or either Ag Committee or members are looking to cut the SNAP program or conservation funding to offset the cost of increasing payments or estimated payments to farmers, we're not talking about a plan for success in the Farm Bill, because it does not have the kind of bipartisan vote coalition you're going to need. And I'm not even certain, given what we've seen in the House, if bipartisanship can even win the day, or may have complications for the Speaker. So there's a lot of challenges on the House floor in particular. And of course, this is an even-numbered year and a presidential even-numbered year, so the election season is going to take over very quickly. In some respects, already has taken over the legislative process, but it's certainly going to shorten the legislative calendar. So that leads me to this, and this is our last slide, and we'll go to questions. The sort of, if there is a path, if there is a chance for a Farm Bill in 2024, what might it look like? And I want to be really clear. This is not a prediction in any way, shape, or form of how this will play out. This is kind of my attempt to say, okay, all those challenges in front of us, what might it look like if we were to make progress? February, we're halfway through it. Nothing's gotten done. And maybe even worse, the fight over immigration and border security and the funding for Ukraine, Israel, and other national security issues is demonstrating yet again a challenge in getting legislation through, particularly anything that's complex and involves a lot of funding, which is a great way to describe a farm bill. So February's out. March, we have the CR issues on the 1st and the 8th. So if Congress doesn't do something, and that something would either be passing any of the or all of the appropriation bills that have yet to make it through either chamber. If they don't get that done, we've got to do another extension of the CR. And if we don't get that done, and the CR just stands for continuing resolution, which really is an appropriation kind of Band-Aid, right? If you don't pass the annual appropriations bills, then the continuing resolution just basically reads as continue the funding levels from the year prior. And so that was what we've been operating under since October 1st. They were set to expire in November. They were extended to February. February now extended to March 1st and 8th. If there's something not done by March 1st or 8th, we go into government shutdown territory, which really will disrupt everything. So stay tuned on that one. March may also be a time in which the House Agriculture Committee could begin its process. We could see legislation possibly, maybe even working towards a markup on that legislation. April, May is a pretty critical time frame. We expect a new Congressional Budget Office baseline, so a new 10-year projection to come out sometime in that time frame. Now we're talking, the House Agriculture Committee, presumably in the April-May time frame, if they haven't moved in March, starts. The floor in the House is obviously a much bigger question. Does the Senate Ag Committee get started sometime in that time frame as well? Again, we've not seen proposals or legislation put forward yet. But April, May becomes a very critical time frame, in part because the new CBO baseline may become applicable if they don't move prior to that. So a lot of these kind of weird inside the legislative game aspects that have to be dealt with in the next couple months. By the time we get to June, I think June's our last best chance to see anything happen. If we're going to make any progress at all. In fact, you'd really like to see at least one of these bills make it to one of the chamber floors, because by July, we're hitting the convention season, the presidential nominating conventions, and then through November, it's the election season. And Congress is not going to be getting anything substantive done. There's a big question about funding the government again with the federal fiscal year ending on September 30th. So we've got a whole chunk of the legislative calendar that normally would be available that will not. If they make any progress in any one of these stages, enough to actually have a viable sort of legislative vehicle to look at, then there's an outside chance that any kind of lame duck Congress after the November elections could have worked through the differences and issues. But this is only possible, one, if there's an actual lame duck Congress that has any real substantive work that's not consumed by funding or other issues. And in order to do anything the lame duck, I would think both committees will have probably had to at least have marked up legislation. So there's something to negotiate and work through. I don't think you can start doing a whole sort of farm bill from scratch in a lame duck scenario. The other thing the lame duck may provide is an extension. And then we get an extension of the current farm bill discussions, and I begin to wonder whether or not we need to, whether or not that conversation starts looking at a multi-year extension rather than kicking this down the road 1 year at a time in a congressional situation that it does not appear to be improving for the prospects of legislation. So anyway, again, not a lot of optimism on that. So apologies to everybody whose day was not improved with that discussion. But that's kind of what we're looking at least in terms of what a process might entail or involve. And I think with that, we have reached the end of our little presentation here. We can jump into questions if they are showing up, or Nick and I can just fill the air for the next 10 to 15 minutes. I know we've got a few announcements that we probably want to, upcoming webinars. So while you're thinking of your questions and anything that jumps out at you, put it into the question box and we will try to answer it best we can. Meantime, Nick, you want to give a quick overview of what's coming up in the IFAS series and other webinars?
Yep. So we are, I think this is our 5th of 6th fifth of six virtual IFAS presentations in the webinar format that we've done. The last one's coming up next Thursday, February 22nd, where Scott Irwin will be talking about the renewable diesel boom. That was, I think, a topic when we did the in-person meetings in January, garnered a lot of interest. And Scott's done a lot of work and analysis on that, and kind of a lot of interesting policy things associated with that renewable diesel boom, kind of driving some of the investment activity we've seen there. So tune in for that one. And then another webinar series, short webinar series that we've rolled out is crop risk management for 2024. And so we're going to do a two-parter on that. First one will be this coming Monday, February 19th. Gary Schnittke will be joining me in the studio. We'll be talking about probably focusing on that ARC PLC decision, going into a little bit more detail on that, as well as talking about kind of the crop budget situation and maybe some other risk management things to think about, including looking ahead to where we think those crop insurance decisions, what those might look like, as well as we are in the price discovery period now in the month of February. Then in March, first Monday in March, March 4th, we'll do part 2 of that series. At that point, we will know what those projected prices are for insurance, so we can go into a little bit more detail on that, take a look at what premiums will be for policies relative to the last few years. And we'll have some kind of finalized numbers to talk about there. So more of a crop insurance focus on part 2 there on Monday, March the 4th. So please consider registering for and joining us for those crop risk management webinars as well. Another series that we've got going on that's sponsored by FarmDoc within the College of ACES here at the University of Illinois is a farm safety series. And they are doing a once a month webinar kind of into the fall. And the next one is actually coming up next week on Tuesday, February 20th. And so that series is Cultivating Caution, a monthly guide to farm safety and health. Again, they picked a Tuesday every month, put those on the schedule out through the rest of the spring, summer, and into the fall. And that's a series you can also sign up for and get notified about when those monthly webinars come up. And we invite you to join us for those as well, with some of our colleagues from within the college talking about some various topics. And then finally, again, I am serving as Todd Gleason this morning, so we got to promote the meeting that Todd kind of spearheads here coming up in March, Tuesday, March 5th. We've got the all-day Ag Outlook. It is the FarmDoc team's incursion into the state of Indiana at the Beef House in Covington, Illinois. So the FarmDoc team, willag.org, and University of Illinois Extension will be presenting this all-day Ag Outlook at the Beef House. It's an annual tradition going back to the early 90s. Again, this one's scheduled for Tuesday, March 5th. Doors open at 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern. There will be coffee and those famous Beef House rolls in the morning, and then a lunch at midday as well, around all of the good sessions that Todd has scheduled for that. I know I'll be on the speaking agenda. Jonathan, I know you've got another event here on campus, so you will not be joining us this year. I don't know if that helps or hurts attendance.
I was gonna say that's probably a good reason to show up, is that you won't have to hear about a farm bill at that meeting, at least not from me. So
I'll probably be fielding your farm bill questions if they come up that day. But yes, please do join us for that all-day Ag Outlook. Information here in the slide, as well as on the FarmDoc Daily websites as well, in terms of how to get registered for that. And more detailed agenda information. Got a few questions that came in. So why don't we go ahead and, Jonathan, why don't you think about those for a second while I recognize our sponsors. So as always, very appreciative of our sponsors that help us do what we do here on the FarmDoc team, whether that's writing the articles we put out on a daily basis, doing these webinars, or some of the other videos. As well as the other work we do through our social media accounts. So thanks to the TIA Center for Farmland Research, Compure Financial, Corteva AgriScience, Farm Credit Illinois, the Illinois Corn Growers Association, FS Growmark, and the Illinois Soybean Association. We certainly appreciate that support. Allows us to do what we do. And also want to recognize our educational partners, the University of Illinois College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences, or College of ACES. All of us on the farmdoc team are faculty or staff within the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics in that college, as well as University of Illinois Extension, and also the Illinois Farm Business Farm Management Association, or FBFM. That partnership is extremely valuable, as it is a cooperative organization of 5,000 plus farms across the state. And the information and data we get through that partnership also really allows us to give you the high quality information that we use, whether that be our crop budgets or any of the other analysis we do in terms of looking at impacts and projections for what's ahead for production ag in Illinois and more broadly throughout the Corn Belt. So Jonathan.
All right, we got some questions. So let's try to work through these here one at a time. Is the Inflation Reduction Act affected by the Farm Bill, specifically the 45Z tax credit, which I believe is one of the renewable energy tax credits that was included in the Inflation Reduction Act? So there is a short answer with a long caveat. In general, no. The Inflation Reduction Act is already signed into law, would not be affected by the Farm Bill. Tax provisions in particular are outside the jurisdiction of the agriculture committees and would not, certainly wouldn't be in anything written at the committee level. The long caveat is, well, so as we talked about as using the conservation funding that was provided by the Inflation Reduction Act as an offset for something like reference prices, there's always a chance that the Farm Bill could include some changes to what was passed, what was enacted in the Inflation Reduction Act. For any tax credit to actually be impacted by a Farm Bill, however, either the Finance Committee or the House Ways and Means Committee would have to bring an amendment on the House or Senate floor to do that. So the likelihood is really, really small that we would see anything other than something like the offset discussion come into play with a Farm Bill.
So a little different way of thinking about that question. And I think this was sort of a question, or maybe even a fear when the IRA was passed, is that money that's outlined for the conservation programs through the IRA, that is not permanent Farm Bill baseline.
Correct.
But is it potentially a way to pull what would be permanent baseline conservation funding out and shift it to commodity title for reference price increase? And so because of the IRA funding, using that as a justification. But the problem with that is then when you start looking at the out years when the IRA funding is gone, you've basically taken long-term baseline out of the conservation area, put it in the commodity title, and that's just setting up potential issues 5-6 years down the road.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's just a lot of difficulties in moving that around. And actually, you traditionally do not see this sort of shifting amongst the titles because of the political challenges and these sort of implications. And Nick, you're right. Like, the Inflation Reduction Act money is not through the CCC or Farm Bill authorization. So it is a separate appropriation, multi-year appropriation that it sits out there above the baseline and is not included in it, which means that's why this sort of risk issue of using it as an offset really comes into play depending on what you use that offset for. And then if you do take baseline dollars, now you've impacted the permanent funding availability. So it is not an easy there's not an easy, magic pot of money there just to move around. It does entail a whole lot of complications and challenges, not the least of which are the political challenges that come with how you do that. Which kind of jumps to this next question. It says, why the strong push to increase reference prices if current law already seems to adjust them?
That is a good question.
That's a great question. And it kind of depends, right? As we've noted, soybeans and corn will see that reference price increase. So will a host of other commodities. However, there are 3 commodities in particular that will not see that reference price increase under the 2018 law. And that is cotton, or seed cotton, I guess, which used to be called cotton, peanuts and rice. And, certainly if you are holding base acres or lobbying on behalf of rice, cotton, and peanuts, you can see that as a problem. The reality is their reference prices in statute were set so high in 2014 and again in 2018 that even 85% of the most recent high prices that all commodities and farmers have seen have not impacted that effective reference price calculation. So I guess the market prices have to go even higher before they begin to get that kicked in for a couple of years. So it's not as if And I think you saw that in the one slide where the peanut reference price relative to market year average prices, you saw that year over year, the market year average prices were well below the reference price. So not all crops are going to see that automatic increase. In fact, corn and soybeans are the most significant. Sorghum would also see it. Some of the other grains and oilseed crops would see that as well. But in the political sense, the three southern commodities, seed, cotton, rice, and peanuts would not. And so they presumably, although none of them that I'm aware of have actually put forward what their reference price increase ask is, they are presumably pushing for it. And we're still waiting to see what that would look like. And then kind of another component of this reference price question. So there's a question about whether Secretary Vilsack is able to use the Commodity Credit Corporation authorities to fund or increase reference price shortfalls. And I wish there was an easy answer to this. The first part of my answer is the Secretary does not have the authority to change reference prices. Those are statutory provisions. And so USDA can't go in and change it. The CCC question, however, is a little bit different because what we've seen the last few years, particularly around the market facilitation program back in 18 and 19, is that the CCC authority has been interpreted very broadly to allow rather significant payments, particularly out of that MFP program. And so, could they concoct another kind of MFP type program that put funding to or made payments to farmers? Certainly it's possible. One of among many challenges of that is the fact that would have no impact on the baseline. It would only be temporary. So there's no way for them to sort of do, a multi-year, 5-year type program. So I don't think it's an easy out or another easy option. But I do know that there's been talk about looking at restricting some of that CCC authority and whether that would be an offset. Of course, USDA is going to be less than happy with that because it restricts their flexibility to respond to emergencies and other disasters. So a whole lot of uncertainty around that. It's a great question. It's a tough issue. And it's, indicative of why we haven't seen the progress we would expect to have seen by this point. But with that question, I see we're nearly into the 60-minute timer. And so let me just sort of sign off with Nick here. Thanks for joining me this morning. Jim, thanks for all the work on this. And to everybody who joined us this morning, thanks for taking time out of your day to talk about a farm bill. And hopefully we have some more answers sometime in the near future. Everybody out there, thanks a lot. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye.
Thanks.